I welcome Professor Carl Lindskoog here to our Theology Unhinged discussions, and it is specifically for the reason because I know that you are a professor of political science or whatever it is.
History.
Yeah, history.
Mm-hmm.
But also that your area of interest, Carl, is Haiti. And immigration from Haiti to United States. I think that was your PhD or the thesis. And I've been most recently quite perplexed by pronouncements of our president, where he started to pick up on Haitians. First claiming that all of them have AIDS, which is complete nonsense. And now with this as whole pronouncements again, picking up on Haitians. And I don't know where it is coming from, so help me.
Okay.
What's your theory, where it might be coming from? And, you know, if we, as we talk about it, touch upon matters of faith or theology, it'll be great. But if we don't, that's still fine. I think that our viewers will be illuminated and thankful for your insights. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for the chance to talk about this. So, I think obviously the larger context for this with the Trump presidency is the xenophobia and nativism that's been his calling card and that he launched his presidential campaign upon. So, you know, it's not just Haitians, of course, but lately he's been really targeting Haitians. And I think one thing that's been remarkable about the Trump presidency is the toxic stew of racism and xenophobia and nativism that he brings together. And if you look at the history of U.S. relations with Haiti and then also U.S. treatment of Haitian refugees and Haitian migrants, all those things come together and definitely predate Donald Trump. So even from the very beginning of the Haitian Republic with the slave revolt in Saint-Domingue, the U.S. policymakers and presidents reacted with horror and revulsion that black people were rising up. And from that point, racism has really been embedded in Americans' response towards Haitians. And I think it's the legacy of that, in part, that Donald Trump is
Do you think that he is reading, or that he would know this much of history?
No, I don't think so. But I think
it's
it's complex, but I think it's interesting how the weight of history can still have a big influence, even if it's largely unconscious in someone like Donald Trump. And so
through his friends, perhaps.
Through his friends, what he reads. Well, he doesn't read, apparently, he says, and people say. But you know, he watches the TV news. You know, the media has endlessly repeated these sort of misconceptions historically and continues to about Haiti and Haitians. Sometimes it's explicit, sometimes it's subtle. But I think in American history, and this is reflected in policy too, there's been not just a racist reaction to Haiti and Haitians coming here, but this sort of idea of they're so foreign, they're so African, and then there's been this idea that they're dangerous and diseased, and so therefore they pose a threat to us culturally and physically. You know, Trump recently said, as you said, mentioned this thing of, all Haitians have AIDS, which was a very damaging and false notion in the 1980s and even into the 1990s. Apparently, that's when Trump's worldview was formed, and he hasn't changed much since then. So I'm thinking that might be, he didn't know anything about Haitians, perhaps. He had this idea from back then, and so now he just keeps replicating
Sure, but it resurfaced again, this time without that illness. And you mentioned, race or these kind of things. But I haven't been in Haiti, but I visited some other Caribbean nations and saw that it is clearly African Caribbean, or I don't know what it would be the proper way. Jamaica is, I would guess, almost identical in some respect in composition, racial composition. So why still, picking? Do you think that it is really that for the reason that Haiti was the first free state or slave-free state, or their slaves freed themselves and established something, or
yeah, I do think that has earned it a particular disdain in the sort of minds and eyes of Western Europeans and Anglos in the Western Hemisphere.
Not mine.
No, right. Yes,
or
I hope
yours.
neither, but in many, and this is throughout some of the Americas too. The idea that despite the fact that there are large African and Afro-Caribbean and Afro-Latino populations throughout Latin America, of course, there's still this idea that, well, Haiti is the most African, the blackest of the American republics. And when it's coming from a white supremacist society or a racist position, that has certain negative connotations in many people's minds, whether it's diseased or, it's commonly repeated how Haiti's the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, and then there's this, when that's
and
coming
from... Yeah, just curious.
Yes,
It might be,
But that's usually not just a economic observation in its own right. Oftentimes that's tinged with, judgments about race and what's the relationship between poverty and race and things. Whereas we might talk about race, but it's more how have they been exploited by the United States and other powerful nations to contribute to that lingering and persistent poverty.
As if poverty would be of some moral flaw or something like that. It is not. Having been myself poor as a student, or living and growing up under communism, and being definitely not from the caste which were promoted but rather suppressed over there. So that's completely wrong. Thinking that it correlates. It's just so unfair.
Particularly when poverty, as a whole impoverished nation, is the result of policies which exploit and drain wealth from nations like Haiti, and historians have documented imperialism and colonialism, and right. And so that's another thing that's sorely missing from the president's statements is there's no sense of the United States' responsibility for Haiti's poverty or the plight of Haitian refugees and migrants.
Yeah, I think that you mentioned that briefly before I rudely interrupted you. With that issue of and help me because coming from Europe, I'm not that well phrased in American or America's histories. I think that wasn't Haiti actually occupied by the United States and under protectorate or something like that?
Yeah, for some decades, nearly 2 decades, it was occupied during the early part of the 20th century. In that time, the idea was, well, they're not able to, manage their own affairs, and it was heavily racist, the sort of justifications for American imperialism and occupation. They also, the U.S. Marines brutally suppressed an independence movement there. And even after the United States left Haiti, they installed a series of basically leaders who represented clients of the United States and the Duvalier dictators, dictators, the first father and then son were the best example of that. So brutal dictatorships, which obviously contributed to the poverty and the mass misery of the people, were supported and funded by the United States because they were conveniently anti-communist and they were the client states right across from the communist Cuba after 1959. So that's just one of many ways the United States bears responsibility for Haiti's impoverishment and the plight of Haitians, who sometimes then came to the United States seeking freedom and economic opportunity, and were mostly excluded, detained, and imprisoned, and often sent back to a dangerous and devastating situation.
Just think about it. I'm thinking about all my friends who tried to escape, and many of them escaped communism by climbing over that Iron Curtain. And thinking that they were kind of packed and shipped immediately back, that's just absolutely scary idea.
And
thankfully-
advocates for
Yeah.
refugees and the international community pointed out those things, even during the midst of the coup, the first major coup, and toppling or the removal of the democratically elected Aristide presidency. Many Haitians tried to come here. We were officially, as a nation, condemning that coup and saying that they're not legitimate, but still trying to send them back to this bloody and dangerous situation. So
it's almost like I somewhere read that actually that occupation by United States was instigated by bankers.
Right.
American bankers who were thinking that they are going to default on loans, so they simply came with the army or Marines. Is it right? Or?
It's true, and a lot of the actually many of the invasions and occupations of Latin America, and there's almost too many to count throughout the hemisphere, were often done at the behest of international American or international financial institutions. And the idea was, well, we have to protect our interests, and then you can find a convenient justification for the fact, well, they need some help managing their institutions, or we're gonna, and so there sometimes was a nice veneer put on it, but it almost always was to protect American interests.
But as soon as you take over the country, you are also responsible for that country. So was there any benefits at all for Haiti during those decades when America was in charge, like improving infrastructure?
Yeah, there was some of that. There was some of that.
Yeah.
I think many Haitians and most historians of Haiti would probably say the damage far outweighed the benefits that came from the American occupation, but there was some of that. We could still have a discussion about whether that was for the benefit of Haitians. Colonial and occupying powers need to be able to get around, and they need infrastructure to effectively occupy. But sometimes there's some minor
but
benefits
not enough,
that come
clearly.
with it. Of course,
I understand,
especially if you think self-determination is an important principle.
Or helping the people on the ground,
Right.
and especially lifting the whole nation.
Right. And
That
that's
was
certainly
probably not
no,
on
and
their
if
mind
anything,
at all.
it led to the chronic instability, political instability, the sort of repeated cycles of dictators, or it had all kinds of devastating ramifications going forward.
So, just listening to you, I'm coming up with a theory that Haitians are picked up by our current president, or specifically them, because of down-seated guilt of Americans. Would you? Because if there is this kind of attempt at least to justify that we don't need to treat them properly. It's a flipped reaction, of course. But those countries we don't know almost anything about, where we did not bring havoc or abuse or whatever, we don't care. But if they were harmed by us, then we want to kind of partly justify it. They deserve that, and we still have this kind of feeling towards them. Or
I don't know about that. Perhaps that's sometimes what is influencing, American policymakers' statements, or I'd be kind of surprised if that were what's really at play in the Trump administration's statements or responses towards Haitians. I tend to think it's more simple. He's traded on and seems to be very persuaded by racist, xenophobic ideas of foreign peoples. Haitians have the sort of unfortunate status of almost the most foreign out of the people coming here, along with Africans, because of race and history, and so if he doesn't want immigrants, he especially doesn't want the blackest, the most foreign, the most far from those prized Norwegian or other European immigrants. So I think it's simpler probably xenophobia and racism
and
at
the
play.
fear of that spirit of liberty.
Well,
Among
yeah,
Haitians,
I
probably.
think that if there's something that's deep seated,
Mm-hmm.
that might be more
Mm-hmm.
more what's happening, because whether people acknowledge it or not, Haiti represents in the minds of many people, Haitians and non-Haitians, African Americans, many hold this to be true, you know, the spirit of rebellion
Mm-hmm.
and liberation from their history and going forward, and just, you know, Haitian struggles for freedom in this country and in Haiti
Mm-hmm.
right now are remarkable, and they're really a lesson for us all who want freedom and equality. And so if that threatens certain people's interest, then that's something to keep out of the country. You know?
They were doing it at the same time as American colonists were rebelling against their British overlords.
Right.
So there should be this camaraderie in between, but probably the race intervenes
so.
and immediately shows that rebellion, that American Revolution, as it is being called, was not that particularly unique, that there was another actually Caribbean African nation who did roughly at the same time the same thing.
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot there, and it's complex. I think that the fact that our revolution here in this country, and then there's the French Revolution and the Haitian Revolution, sort of triad of Atlantic world revolutions. You know, the Declaration of Independence and Jefferson's ideas and words in there are radical, and they did continue, and they do continue to still resonate. But he himself and who he was speaking on behalf of were representing white supremacy and settler colonialism and slavery. And so, you know, if you were trying to do that and maintain settler colonialism and slavery at the same time, then it couldn't be the sort of thoroughgoing revolution that the ideas and the words of the Declaration of Independence fully could mean. And so that's why Jefferson simultaneously worked to bring about the revolution here and had radical principles of, you know, being a republic and all men being created equal, but also disdain.
But some are more equal than
right,
others.
Right, exactly, the Orwellian. But he also just disdained and tried to contain and suppress the Haitian Revolution. So did George Washington. So did almost every president, you know, who would celebrate the legacy of American independence and freedom, and scoffed at, and then was threatened by, and then tried to help suppress the Haitian
because
Revolution.
our white revolution is much better than your black revolution.
Especially if we're trying to continue to enslave people on the basis of race here in this country.
Or I came across something like that in Jamaica, where there was those freed slaves who were then completely almost put into ghettos or were hiding in the mountains and created their own small communities where they survived until now. But, you know, they were not generally accepted by the society. And this is somehow I see here some similarities. Here are those who actively liberated themselves, but because they were of a different race or they were not viewed as us, they were kind of secluded or insulated, kept out, and not being acknowledged as co-equal. And that's, I think it's somehow a stain on that revolution or on that liberty. And I think that if Americans want to really cherish and find the most beautiful freedom, that would be to embrace all others who are fighting for freedom, like that. You know?
I think so too. Yeah, I think that's a compelling way to put it. And we should also note, since we're talking about the ongoing legacy of freedom from the Haitian Revolution, that soon after they liberated themselves, Haitians who carried out their own liberation helped to liberate the rest of Latin America, because Bolivar and the other people trying to create the independent republics of Latin America went to Haiti, they got assistance, they got military support, and then they went throughout the continent and helped. So Haiti helped not only birth liberation from slavery and the first black republic of the world, but then helped free the rest of the Americas outside of the United States, which had already had its revolution. So their legacy of freedom is lasting, and it might just be what the Trump administration is so afraid of in trying to keep Haitians out.
And that's also the reason to thank you for bringing a closer focus on it, illuminating and explaining it, and I think to embrace Haitians as brothers in the struggle against racism and for freedom. Really. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for talking to me about this.
Thank you, Marvin.